Housing, Mr. Frank Chan. He is also the chairman of the Hong Kong Housing Authority. Tonight, we will be talking about the important topic of housing in Hong Kong, which is probably the #1 issue that most people are concerned about. So we have invited the person most suited to talk about this topic. Welcome, Secretary.
Hi, Eugene. Nice to see you.
Yes. Frank, before we go on, I think all government department has its own policy. So maybe you can tell the viewers briefly, what is the housing policy in Hong Kong?
Well, basically, the long-term housing strategy provides a projection model to avert the imbalance of supply and demand of public housing. You know, at a time when Hong Kong's public housing, inclusive of the public housing, is in acute shortage. So the first objective is to enhance the production of public housing and to enrich the forms of subsidized sales rates so that, you know, for those who can't afford private housing, they can go for the, subsidized sales rate. And of course, the handling of the sales arrangement for private property and also the tenancy management for people who are renting accommodation would also be looked after.
With this policy, does it change according to the situation, or we've always followed the same policy?
Basically, it remains the same.
Okay.
But in 2018, when the chief executive assumed office, we have changed the percentage of housing supply from 60 to 40 to 70 to 30.
Right.
So we produce more public housing so that people could move up to public rental housing more readily.
The government's coming to the end of this term. If you look back under your leadership, what would be some of the achievements that you are proud of?
Well, basically, I would say that, if we look at the facts and figures, well, probably they will speak for themselves. First and foremost, we have identified 350 hectares of land,
right,
which is good enough for 330,000 of public housing, which is good enough for the demand of 301,000 flats in the next 10 years. So that's one thing. And three more important new initiatives would be the provision of transitional housing. Because as you might have noticed, since I assumed office in 2017, on the 9th day, I went to visit those who live in the subdivided units. And from then on, we started the community housing and then the transitional housing, which, the previous governments would not, like to do, put it this way. And then we put up the cash subsidy for those who live in inadequate housing. And also the latest, the tenancy control for those who live in subdivided units. So all these are put in as a transitional or remedial measures to help those who are living not in adequate and reasonable accommodation in Hong Kong.
Yeah, Frank. Before we go on the real issues that we are facing in Hong Kong, we always want to tell our viewers there must be something good about our housing industry in Hong Kong.
Right.
What would that be?
Well, I would say that our housing authority is probably the biggest or one of the biggest public housing producer on this planet Earth.
Yes.
But I must say that even so, the amount of public housing so produced in terms of quantity is still not good enough. And then we are working much harder to enhance the production for the next 10 years.
Right. Frank, let's move on to the current situation. I'm sure most of the viewers are very concerned. I mean, you mentioned about our policy.
Yes.
And do you think all the objectives have been fulfilled so far? If it has, why is Hong Kong still the most, I will use, unaffordable housing in the world?
Well, basically because Hong Kong is a vastly or highly populated, city. We have 7.5 million people, but we have only 1,100 square kilometers of land. But among those 1,100 square kilometers of land, only 7% of it were being made available for housing. And that's why if you divide the number of people in Hong Kong by the amount of land we have, then it would be obviously the most densely populated city in the world.
Yes, yes. Secretary, for the benefit of viewers, I've done some research. In the Hong Kong housing, we have like two major markets, the public and private. Private accounts for 54% of the housing, which 1/3 is for rental, 2/3 is for ownership. And for public, we account for the remaining 46%, where 2/3 is for rent, 1/3 is for ownership. See, it's interesting that when I'm reading up, I'm sure the viewers will agree that in private housing, the average household has to spend 20 years of their salary to buy a 60 square meter flat for nearly $9.6 Hong Kong million. Almost about 6% of the monthly income will go to paying off the mortgage. As for the public sector, is no better. The waiting list for the public rental housing for the 250,000 people, the average is 5.8 years. Are those figures accurate?
Well, I would say that yes, because all these are statistics.
Yes.
From what had happened, So they are basically an analysis of the situation that we have gone past. And therefore, when we are talking about the average waiting time, we have to appreciate it only accounts for those who were housed in the past 12 months. From the time they register for public rental housing to the time they offer a public rental housing for them to decide. So it would depend on the number of people who are moving up to the public rental housing, and also the district they're opting to move over to, for example, like New Territory, urban or extended urban, because the public rental housing available every year would differ depending on where the land is, okay? So if they are queuing for long, then of course, that's the frustration. But what we are trying to do with determination and perseverance, I would say that we would be able to meet their needs in 10 years' time.
Right. That's what you said in last week, which I appreciate you being very honest. It takes about 10 to 20 years before it comes down to reduce to 3 years. And the CE was here a couple of weeks ago and saying the the housing authority is taking too long to build the flats, and the bureaus the bureau says the delay is due to the shortage of land, which is out of your control. Can you just quickly comment on that?
Well, I would say that the chief executive's comment is basically a reflection of her concern on public housing, okay?
Right.
But as a matter of fact, let's put it this way. From the time we identify a piece of land, and then there are a lot of work to be done, okay? Zoning and planning aside, we have to build, water supply system, electricity supply system, gas supply system, survey system, and also telecommunication network, okay? Apart from that, we should also put into, those welfare and community facilities to make it a suitable place to live. And all this will take time. That's why we say that, well, from a piece of greenfield or brownfield, you turn it into a spade-ready site, it would take about 5 to 6 years. And then we would take another 4 to 5 years to build. So somewhere around 9 to 11 years would be a kind of typical value, a figure, okay, that we need to build from a piece of land into a block where people could live in. Of course, we are working very hard to compress the statutory processes, the construction of the infrastructure, and also the building processes for the building. So we are working on that direction, trying to shorten the production time and to move forward with the production capacity so that more people will be able to move up to public housing and also the private housing in lesser time.
Right, Frank. We always been, much news happened on the 14th five-year plan in Hong Kong. And I just want to ask you, the central government's 14th five-year plan has made it quite clear that Hong Kong has to integrate more with the mainland, and that the common prosperity is the main theme, meaning housing is mainly for living rather than a commodity or for investment. Is this a new direction for Hong Kong to follow? Does it match our policy?
Well, basically, if you look into the public housing policy we have in Hong Kong, it's a kind of a common prosperity.
Right.
Because apart from primary distribution to all kinds of distribution of wealth, basically we are taking the public cover into financing the public rental housing or even the subsidized sales rent. It's a kind of a common prosperity. And also we are doing the transitional housing. As you might know, many of those private developers, commercial firms and enterprises, and also the NGOs are working together with the government to build, we are going to build 20,000 units, which is equivalent to a year's public rental housing supply. So it's no small matter. And that also illustrate the kind of Hong Kong can do spirit with the NGOs, with the community, and with the private sector and government. We can do something together.
Right. Right, Frank, let's move on to another comment we received in the news. Xia Baolong, the director of the Hong Kong Macau Affairs Office of the State Council, said Hong Kong must get rid of the subdivided flats and homes by 2049. And recently, the liaison office went to visit our subdivided flats as well.
Yes.
In Xi's policy address, she mentioned about the Tomorrow Lantau, as well as also the Northern Metropolis strategy. So all that won't be effective until in 10 years or more. So do you have any short-term measure that we can alleviate the problem briefly?
Well, firstly, we must give Hong Kong people hope, and we must do whatever we can to make it come true as well. And therefore, in 10 years' time down the road, we would be able to produce sufficient public housing to cover the demand. Mm-hmm. And with a few more to 10 more years, then we would have more land arising from the Lantau Tomorrow vision you just mentioned, the central water reclamation, and also the Northern Metropolis. Right. Then we will see a very bright future. But in the meantime, when public housing is not adequate, then we are putting up the transition housing in a medium-term alleviation of the hardship of those who live in the inadequate housing. Mm-hmm. And also we provide them with cash allowance to ease their financial challenge, as well as the
That's something I'm going to ask you,
yes,
in the next break, yes. Yeah, maybe we'll have a break first.
Okay.
And don't go away.
Studio 930's Halloween horrors. Tonight, It. Tomorrow night, The Nun.
Technology is bringing us fireworks clones.
That's so beautiful.
Creative ideas improve our world. Let's meet the scientists behind some of the most ingenious inventions of our time. Innovation Nation, Season 13, Wednesday night at 8 on Pearl. America's Got Talent is back.
Welcome to America's Got Talent Season 15!
Simon, Heidi and Howie all return as judges, with Sofia Vergara joining the star-studded panel.
Sophia has gone from modern family to new family.
Yes! The amazing performers, singers and dancers all coming together on this stage to compete for the $1 million grand prize. America's Got Talent, Season 15, Friday to Sunday night at 8:30 on Pearl.
What am I doing? Registering trademark. Head to the Accolade website to get an instant online quote and make payment, or call 3521-2999 to get a free trademark search.
We all want a prosperous Hong Kong. To improve our quality of life in every aspect, we need someone who loves our country and Hong Kong to achieve it with us. The Legislative Council General Election will be held on December 19th. The nomination period runs from October 30th to November 12th. Forms are available at the Registration and Electoral Office, District Offices, and at elections.gov.hk. Improve electoral system. Ensure patriots administering Hong Kong.
It's not just about what's in your wallet. Business, economic and financial trends across the globe are some of the many factors that could have a huge impact. We break down what should matter the most to you. Monday night, Money Matters at 8 on Pearl. Revitalize your spirit with valuable wisdom.
And we love because He first loved us. You forgive others, forgive yourself. The joy of the Lord is our strength. When people believe right, they will live right.
New Creation TV, Monday to Friday and Sunday morning at 7 on Pearl.
Welcome back, and we have been talking with Frank Chan, our Secretary for Transport and Housing, about our housing situation and the impact of the 14th Five-Year Plan and our CE's recent policy address. Frank,
yes,
just before the break, we started to talk about your measures. And I want to bring to the viewers' attention that last week, LegCo passed a bill that there's a limit on the rent hikes in those subdivided flats. I think that's a very good start. But honestly, when will these people be able to move into better housing?
Well, I would say that with determination and perseverance, I'm confident that we will do it someday. But perhaps facts and figures will speak for themselves.
Right.
We just talk about, in 10 years' time, we will be able to produce some 330,000 public housing for those who are in need, okay? And therefore, by then, the public housing issue will be relatively, under control. And if we look a little bit further with the Northern Metropolis and then Central Waters Reclamation, as you would have noticed also from Development Bureau's projection that by then we will have another million of domestic units.
Okay.
Well, think about that. We now have 2.9 million residential units. A million means more than a third. And I would say that by then we will be able to solve the problem.
Right. Frank, you also mentioned in 2018, the ratio for public and private housing is from 60 to 40 down to 70 to 30. So I was just thinking, when you have more public housing, that means you will squeeze, that means less private housing, you will squeeze the private sector, that means you pushes more people back into the public sector. Is this the reason why the queue is increasing, the waiting time? Is that it? And also, can I say the housing authority is a victim of your own success?
Well, it all depends where and from what perspective we are looking into the subject matter. Housing to most of the people is a place to live, okay?
Right.
But for some people, they could be an asset to invest in. And therefore, we need to strike a balance between the private housing and the public housing, because the people can't afford to live in private housing or to buy a private housing unit, and therefore they have to rely on public housing. And that's why we shift the emphasis or the percentage distribution from 40, 60 to 30, 70, so that people who are in need of a decent accommodation would move up easier. Okay, of course, given the limitation of land, and therefore we can do as much as we can when land is made available.
But do you agree that when I say that housing authority is a victim of its own success?
I would say that we will try whatever we can to do better. That's
Right.
the people's aspiration, and we will continue to do so.
Right. Also want to ask you that one personal question may not be politically very correct. If the rents, if you look at the hospital authority, where we always look at, the service is good, the rates are low, that's the reason people are rushing to the hospital authority. So can we actually increase the rent of the housing, the public housing, and maybe increase the eligibility? Would that make the queuing time shorter?
Well, it may, but I think the objective of the housing authority is to provide a decent and affordable housing for those who can't afford to live in private housing. So to achieve its ultimate objective, I think we have to stick to that. Of course, in due course, when the economy is recovering, then we might think about, raising the rent. But we do have a mechanism of rent adjustment every 2 years.
Yes.
We take into account of the amount of income for those who are living in public rental housing, and to compare with the level, and we do an adjustment every 2 years.
Right. Housing has always been on the agenda for every chief executive, and the last all the four chief executives have been trying to do something about it, but it seems to be getting worse. Is this going to be a no-win situation? Would the Hong Kong housing problem ever be solved?
I would say yes. Well, given the way that we are moving, and the unearthing of newfound land, put it this way,
right,
then the chance of making it possible is definitely yes.
Yes, and I've done a bit of research, and we see that we've got more private housing units being produced in the last few years. Can we actually work closer with the private sector? Because for whatever reason, they seem to be producing faster. Have you thought about that?
Yes, I have been thinking about that, because at this juncture, we have been talking about enlisting the support of the private enterprises to help design and build public housing.
Yes.
So as to enhance its production capacity for the general public.
Yes, yes.
And at the same time, I also learned about some proposition from some political parties that they want to build 65 or 650,000 of housing units, inclusive of both public and private housing. Well, what the government can do is all on public housing and the provision of land for land auction. But then, you know, many of those landowners who have land somewhere, they can put it up and do the kind of rezoning and planning and build private housing as well. So by working together, you know, with the hospital authority and with the housing authority and also with the housing society, we are going to build 330,000. And if the private sector is going to build more, then the more the merrier, I would say.
Yes. You know, in the past, there have been accusations between collusion between the government and, say, private enterprises. That's the reason why there are a lot of red tapes being put in to ensure everything sort of according to processes and all that. In a situation like that, where you want to increase housing, where everything is so transparent, have you thought of actually any out-of-the-box idea where we can cooperate better with the private sector?
Well, I would venture every possible avenue because, you know, as from my perspective, the more housing we can produce, be it public or private, the more merrier the people would be. And the easier for them to either to rent or to buy their own home. And therefore, during my term, I can see that we have been working very closely with the private sector all the way and upholding the principle in integrity of public services and enlisting the support from the private sector as well. So I think that that's also a way to go, but we do have some, you know, cornerstone to take care of.
Yes, the Secretary, the Hong Kong private home prices hit a record high in July. And as you know, the government collects a lot of money from stamp duty as well as land premium. In the year 2020 to 2021, it made up about 30% of its revenue. So if prices go up, that means our revenue will go up because we have so many projects like in education, welfare and all that. So is that a conflict of interest when we're trying to the government, when you're trying to reduce the price of housing in the private sector?
I don't think so. We do also believe in the market because the housing price would depend on supply and demand and also the anticipation of the economy moving direction, okay? So it's something more than just, you know, public and private sector. It would be also a global impact as well, depending on how the economy post-pandemic is going. So I would say that, you know, we have to do our own job well first.
Yes.
And then we keep close watch on the economy locally and globally and try to figure out what we can do in due course.
Yes. Frank, earlier you mentioned there's some government subsidies to those who are actually queuing for more than 3 years at the public housing. I think it's a very good intention. However, it kind of encourages more people to get into the queue and become set a vicious cycle. Do you agree?
I don't think so, because as of now, we have put in something like 20 billion Hong Kong dollar to help those who are living in inadequate housing. Inclusive of the cash allowance, we are anticipating some $8 billion for 3 years. And in terms of transition housing, we are talking about 11.6 billion ongoing. And therefore, I don't think that would be the problem that we have to look into because these measures are meant to help them out.
Just now, you make some suggestions. Since I mentioned about how to work closer with the private sector, you said you've been thinking of tendering projects for design and construction together and all that. Why isn't this done earlier?
Well, we have done it the earliest possible time, as I've told you during the time when we met before the interview.
Yes.
Well, actually, we started the transition housing right in the first month of my arrival or my assumption of the office. And then we kick off the community housing project in September 2017 with support from the community chairs. And then we start the ball rolling, you know, until now. We are able to build 20,000 transit housing in 2 years' time,
Yes. Frank, and the last question I'm going to ask you is like every guest when we come up, like the CE, we always ask her what her intentions are for the next term. What will be your advice to the next Secretary for Housing, think that he or she should concentrate, just in case you're not in this position, since you have everything all lined up?
Well, I wouldn't say anything because I would presume that anyone who take up this particular position would have their own judgment, their own philosophy, and own plan to move forward. The most important thing is, irrespective who is in that particular position, take care of those who are in need, and move as quickly as we can and build more as much as we can.
Yes, thank you, Secretary Chan, for coming tonight. You have promised us a few solutions to our housing shortage, and our viewers will certainly be looking forward to their fulfillment, hopefully even before the target date. And thanks for joining us. Have a good week and good night.